Let me ask you a question. What is your thought about the Belt and Road Initiative? Well, for many, especially in the West, they believe that the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI, is a debt trap diplomacy created by China to make countries indebted to China. Well, just listen to what Professor Kishore Mahbubani has to say about this.
Why is there so much negative portrayals of the Belt and Road Initiative? As the former Polish Deputy Prime Minister was saying, if you travel in the West, you mention Belt and Road, they say, oh, that's debt trap diplomacy. You know, that's China trying to trap the rest of the world, suck them into traps, and make them indebted. We know that's rubbish, but that rubbish is believed by the most sophisticated and the most powerful and the most influential journals in the world. And when they pour poison on the Belt and Road Initiative, they are at the same time insulting the intelligence of the billions who have signed up for the Belt and Road Initiative. And they're not even aware when they drop the tsunami of condescension on the third world, they're insulting a massive amount of humanity. But what is even more amazing is that when they pour poison on this initiative, they're actually poisoning their own rice bowls. Because in the long run, and this brings me back to my first point, if we are in one small interdependent world, if something goes wrong with the 88% who live outside the West will be affected too. Again, the former Polish Deputy Prime Minister was dead right. When China invests in Africa, there are less migrants to Europe. Europe should send a thank you note to China. No thank you note from Europe. And that's the tragedy.
Well, Professor Kishore Mahbubani was right. The Belt and Road Initiative has often been portrayed as a debt trap diplomacy strategy by China, where it allegedly lures developing countries into unsustainable debt to gain leverage and control over their assets. But if you really dig into the details, this whole debt trap idea doesn't quite add up. Sure, there are a few cases that get a lot of attention, but the bigger picture is more complex, and in many instances, the situation is much more positive than it's made out to be. Let's start by looking at where this idea comes from. The theory is that China offers huge loans to developing countries for infrastructure projects, knowing that these nations won't be able to pay them back. Then, when they can't, China swoops in and takes control of valuable assets like ports, highways, or railways. The most famous example people love to bring up is Sri Lanka's Hambantota port. It's often said that Sri Lanka couldn't pay back its loans to China, so China seized the port. But here's what actually happened. Sri Lanka voluntarily leased the port to a Chinese company for 99 years in exchange for $1,112 million. The port wasn't performing well financially, so the Sri Lankan government saw this as a way to get some much-needed cash. Also, only around 10% of Sri Lanka's total debt is owed to China. The majority of its debt came from international markets where they'd taken out high-interest loans, which were the real source of their financial troubles. So, calling this a debt trap doesn't quite fit. In fact, when you look at countries like Kenya or Djibouti, which are also frequently mentioned in these debt trap discussions, the numbers tell a different story. In Kenya, the famous Mombasa-Nairobi Railway, largely funded by Chinese loans, has been a game-changer for transportation. Yet, only about 21% of Kenya's overall external debt is owed to China. They actually owe more to other lenders like Japan and international organizations such as the World Bank. Similarly, Djibouti has Chinese loans that account for about 43% of its debt, but they also borrow heavily from multilateral organizations like the IMF. So it's not like these countries are solely dependent on China for financing. Another thing that tends to get overlooked is that China has shown it's willing to work with countries that run into financial difficulties. For example, in Ethiopia, China helped finance the Ethiopia-Djibouti Railway, which has been a game changer for moving goods between the two countries. When Ethiopia had some challenges repaying the loans, China stepped in and restructured the debt, making the terms easier to manage. This kind of flexibility shows that China isn't trying to trap these countries, it's working with them to ensure long-term success. Pakistan's Gwadar port, which is part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is another example. The port is strategically important for Pakistan, and Chinese investment has boosted trade and infrastructure in the region. While there are loans involved, Pakistan's debt to China is actually pretty manageable compared to what they owe other creditors. And let's not forget about how China has even forgiven or restructured a lot of the loans given to developing countries, particularly in Africa. According to one study, China restructured or outright cancelled more than $15 billion in African debt between 2000 and 2019. In countries like Zambia and Angola, China extended repayment schedules and renegotiated terms when these nations faced financial issues, helping them avoid default. This shows that rather than forcing countries into bad financial situations, China is more interested in building sustainable, long-term relationships. So, is China's Belt and Road Initiative really a debt trap? Not really. There are certainly challenges that come with taking on large loans for big infrastructure projects, but that's true of any major development financing. Most of the countries involved in the BRI are seeing tangible benefits, and in many cases, China has been flexible when repayment becomes a problem. Instead of being some kind of financial trap, the BRI is more about building infrastructure and opening up new trade routes that can benefit both China and the countries involved. The debt trap narrative oversimplifies what's really going on and ignores the positive impacts these projects are having across the globe. In the end, the Belt and Road Initiative is a lot more than a set of loans. It's about investing in global infrastructure, connecting regions that were previously isolated, and creating new opportunities for trade. Sure, there are risks, but calling it a debt trap just doesn't reflect the bigger picture. Many of these countries are seeing long-term economic gains, and China, far from being a ruthless lender, is proving to be a partner that's willing to help them when things get tough. So, do you still think that the Belt and Road Initiative is a debt trap? Share your thoughts and leave your comments below. If you like this video, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to show your support.